opportunities to be able to recognize how you can better engage with your National Assembly. I'm happy to be joining you from Abidjan, where together with a host of civil society organizations who are based here in Côte d'Ivoire, we are able to plug into this afternoon's session with some of us joining in physically and some joining in virtually. We are confident that we'll be able to have a very good conversation in the course of this 2-hour session. Before I go ahead to introduce our speaker for today, who would certainly make his presentation on the subject matter that has been selected for the day, let me quickly run you through the Open Parliament Engagement and Networking in West Africa project, which has made this possible. Over the years, we had recognized that civil society organizations, particularly those of us who work with parliaments, whereas we try our very best to do the work that we have chosen to do, are usually challenged as a result of the lack of resource materials and technical information on how Parliament works and the various opportunities to engage. And so it cripples us, especially when it comes to the work that we need to do. Hence, the Open West Africa project has been designed by Parliamentary Network Africa as a way of bringing together civil society organizations that monitors and engages parliaments across West Africa, but more importantly, to create such learning platforms so that we can all learn and share from experts who have been doing works in the area of parliament over the years. Since August, we have had series of these learning and networking sessions, which has spoken about different topics and subject matters. And today I am excited that we are joining again for today's session. For those of you who may not have joined us in previous sessions and would like to do so, I would like to have a feel of how the previous sessions went. I want to encourage you to visit the Parliamentary Network Africa's YouTube page. The YouTube page is Parliamentary Network Africa, Parliamentary Network Africa. And you will find video recordings of the various sessions that has been held. And you definitely would be able to have a good understanding of the presentations that we have done over the years. I am aware that those of us who have joined who do not have access or cannot understand or comprehend the English language, there is simultaneous French interpretation going on. And because of that, myself and the facilitator will be minded to slow down a bit in our speech, in our presentation, so that the facilitator can also have it easier to interpret the session. My name is Sami Obeng. I am Executive Director for Parliamentary Network Africa, and I'm happy to moderate this afternoon's session. At this point, I will go straight ahead to introduce our guest presenter for today, who would then take us through the subject of understanding parliamentary practice and procedure for effective legislative policy influencing. Understanding parliamentary practice and procedure for effective legislative policy influencing. And Monsieur Bennett, I see that you had, I think you're having challenges with your interpretation for French. My colleagues will get through to you in the chat box to be able to engage you on that particular subject matter. And so our facilitator for today, is somebody who is somebody who has been working within the parliamentary space, especially in Sierra Leone, for many, many years. He has served as clerk to many committees of the Parliament of Sierra Leone, one that has a deep understanding on parliamentary practice and procedure, having participated in many local and international capacity building training programs and courses on how parliaments work. And currently he serves as acting director for the Department of Parliamentary Assistance and Coordination of the Parliament of Sierra Leone. And so without much ado, I present to you my very good friend, Mamadou Lamine Dean Rogers. Mr. Dean Rogers will do the presentation for us. We'll have the opportunity to ask questions. And while he does his presentation, if you have any questions, please do well to type them in the chat box, and we would certainly have him address those questions. So Mr. Rogers, if you can hear me, welcome. I hope Freetown is...
So this afternoon, I will be talking through introduction to this topic, ensuring or breaking the rules, how practices and procedures influence the legislative policy making, effective policy influencing mechanisms or tools, the new normal. Because all what we are discussing this afternoon has interconnectedness with the new normal. And in the age of the new normal, there are certain things parliaments cannot avoid. And from that, I will be concluding. Introduction. We are talking here about parliamentary practice and procedures. So, from a general understanding, or from a parliamentary standpoint, parliamentary practices and procedures are a set of rules, precedents, steps, arrangements, and practices which describe how Parliament does certain things. And these are the questions my presentation will be answering throughout this period. So how Parliament reaches decision. This is informed by practice and procedure. How a bill becomes a law. And this is in fact a rudiment in parliamentary business. What is debated and when? How and when to hold the executive to account? How MPs represent the interests of their constituents? How the work of Parliament is scheduled and organized. So you can see throughout my presentation, each one of the mechanisms that I will be talking to is going to answer one or two of these questions. So if we are talking about practices, if we are talking about steps, there is a tendency for people to ensure it or break it. So for us to be able to understand parliamentary practice and procedure, we have to identify the duty bearers. So the Speaker or presiding officer ensures that the rules of Parliament are applied in a plenary. In the committee proceedings, the chairperson ensures that the rules are applied. So basically, this is saying that the Speaker or presiding officer or the chairperson of the chairpersons of committees are duty bearers when it comes to the applicability of the rules of procedures. So a member of Parliament can raise a point of order if it appears that the rules of procedure have been broken. So besides the chairperson or the speaker, in some jurisdictions you call it president of the National Assembly, even the members of Parliament, the elected members of Parliament, have the responsibility to raise the points of order. For example, a member speaking and not debating to a substantive issue on the floor, or a member speaking in an unparliamentary language. Basically, in Sierra Leone, when a member refers to another member as you guy or guys, that is seen as unparliamentary. You have to refer to a member of Parliament as the honorable member of Parliament. But however, even the most comprehensive rules of procedures do not cater for everything in the legislative environment. So, how do we supplement the gaps in the rules of procedure? Basically, the decisions of the speaker, or you call it the ruling of the speaker, customs, tradition and norms of that parliament. If anybody is aware of, or if participants are aware of the parliamentary environment, you come to realize that each and every parliament has a unique DNA. So this unique DNA are born from or born out of customs, traditions, and norms. So for us to be able to have that, the rules are ensured, are applied, we have certain provisions in our standing orders or in our rules of procedures, which give certain powers. Say, for example, the Speaker of Parliament. In the Parliament of Sierra Leone, Standing Order 42 of the rules of procedures makes the decision of the Speaker final. Hello, am I good with the interpreter? Hello?
I think so, Mr. Rogers.
Okay.
He says that, Mr. Rogers, he says that he would appreciate if you can slow down a bit for him.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So in the Gambia, for example, Standing Order 8.3 makes the ruling of the Speaker final. And after his ruling, there is nothing much any MP can do, because the Speaker's ruling is final on all questions of procedures. In one of the developed democracies, in the UK House of Commons, standing number 24 gives the Speaker of the Commons the same privilege. So you can see that the Speaker is the chief officer of the House. How can we ensure, or how can we influence practices and procedures through the legislative policy making? And I have to lay a foundation in answering this question. The relationship between Parliament and government varies from country to country. But there is something that's common or there are certain things that are common with all parliaments in the world. These are what we refer to constant variables. Say, for example, Parliament makes the laws, represent the people, oversee the executive, monitor performance, hold the executive accountable for its actions, appropriate budgets. These are constant variables for all parliaments in the world. Mechanisms or tools of influence. How do we influence legislative or effective legislative policy making? One, grilling ministers. This is what we refer to as question time. And this is very much common in the parliamentary system of government. Those who are familiar with the British system of government, you realize that every Wednesday, the Prime Minister and members of his cabinet answer to questions raised by members of parliament. And sometimes these questions originate from the constituents or from the people. The other mechanisms we use to influence effective legislative policy making is interpolation or interrogation. This is basically a strategy to scrutinize actions on a single issue or evidence of search when there is a suspicion of wrongdoing. So in the parliamentary sense, when someone is interrogated, it means there is an element of something suspicious. Statement is allowed.
I'm sorry, we have lost the connection of Mr. Rogers. Mr. Rogers, if you can hear me in your audio out, we've lost connection. I'm reconnecting with you shortly. Like we rightly announced, we are trying to use a way around technology. So, yes, Mr. Rogers?
Yeah.
Yes, you are loud and clear now. Yes.
Okay, thank you very much. So as I was saying, statements by ministers, it allows ministers to update parliament or inform parliament about a policy change or amendment to a law. And this is very important, especially for emerging parliaments, where we do not have the expertise to handle some of these key policy issues. So when a minister comes to parliament, he will inform parliament about his policy action. Confirmation, hearing, or vetting process. This is again common in the presidential system of government, where certain positions in government need this is subject to the approval of parliament. And this is very common in Sierra Leone. There is a committee that is called Parliamentary Committee on Appointments and the Public Service. This committee has the right, the constitutional right for that, to uphold or reject nominees of the president before it. We have had instances where this committee has rejected nominees from the president or the head of state. Value for money and public finance oversight. This is the domain of one of the most prominent committees in parliamentary setting, which is the Public Accounts Committee. They examine government accounts and the way government uses public money. Sometimes recommendations from the Public Accounts Committee influence the legislative policy making. So as you can see, all of these are mechanisms or tools used to influence policy making. Motions, a proposal that begs for an action by Parliament. So in fact, somebody once told me that everything we do in Parliament, it has to be motioned. And I have come to realize that for over 10 years, you always hear, I move, that so is so. So for the most part, we motion everything we do in Parliament. For example, the member will move that an inquiry be conducted on the increase of teenage pregnancy. These are topical issues. Sometimes the law does not capture some of the new things, but emotion can move. And sometimes inquiries are done. Petition. It is a direct request to Parliament to action on a specific issue. For example, a direct request by the medical board to improve the conditions of service for healthcare workers. And there is something very new in the application of petitions. If you could recall, when Britain wanted to leave the EU, there was this popular resolution 50. And that resolution had 6.1 petitioners urging the UK government to stay in the EU. So on record, that petition is the most signed petition with 6.1 petitioners.
You mean 6.1 million?
Yes, 6.1 million.
Yes.
Petitioners. That was history making. There has never been the history of petition where you have 6.1 million people urging the government of the UK to stay in the EU.
So again, a bit of a fluctuation in the internet connectivity. We are still getting, yeah, Mr. Rogers?
Hello?
Yes, good.
Yes.
Please go ahead.
Yes, so in addition to the tools and mechanisms, we have the scrutiny process, which again is very important. The scrutiny process basically saying that the integrity of Parliament has to be preserved, and it can only be preserved by abiding to its own rules and processes. So through close and effective scrutiny, policies are examined to see if it is fit for purpose. Effective scrutiny enables Parliament to gauge the intended consequences of policy on society. So we have stages in the scrutiny process. We have pre-legislative scrutiny. This is the process of examining a bill or a policy idea before it is formally laid on the table of the House. And this is the entry point in the legislative process or policy making process or policy idea process. So what are the elements? We have consultation, auditor, peer review, community outreach, use of social media, expert knowledge. So basically, before a law becomes a law, or before a policy becomes binding, it has to face the legislative scrutiny process. So in this process, we have the foundational elements. We consult, we peer review, we do outreach. Sometimes it's not really Parliament. Maybe the MDA that is piloting the bill. That MDA has to create the environment where consultation will be done. We have very important component, which is the civil society engagement. And that is one of the reasons why we are having this event. How can we make good of the nexus between civil society and Parliament across the sub-region? So the legislative scrutiny process. So this is basically defined as a process of examining the relevance, which is the import, the intention, and memorandum of objective of a bill. This particular stage take into consideration all the stages we have in the process of a bill becoming a law. The elements are conformity with the legal provision and the standing order. So when the law comes to Parliament at the legislative scrutiny period, we have to make sure that this law conforms, say for example, with the Constitution, which is the ground norm. So we also have to make sure this law does not contravene any existing law or contradict any existing law. We also have to look at the status of the bill. What is this bill addressing? Has there been any law addressing the same? Can we collapse both laws? And the state also have the first reading of the asset, where in our case, the president signs the law. In other jurisdiction, the prime minister. In other jurisdiction, we have the king signing the law. We have post-legislative scrutiny. This is a new kind of idea in parliamentary setting, or this is an idea that is actually finding fruit in parliaments now. The post-legislative scrutiny process is a post-mortem exercise. It's an M&E exercise where parliament assess the impact of legislation or a method of examining how a particular law has fulfilled its purpose since it came into force. So the elements here are practicality of the law. Is this law realistic? Is it practical? Interpretation of the law by the court. How is the court finding the law? Is the court comfortable with the provisions of the law? Is the provisions in the law applicable and benefit of that law on society? This again is very important. because the overall essence of Parliament is to make law that benefits society. Needs to amend, repeal, or replace. Again, the post-legislative process, we assess whether a particular law needs to be amended, repeal, or replace. Normal. In the beginning of my presentation, I said that emerging issues are influencing the legislative policy making. And these are issues Parliament cannot deny. So one of such issues is sustainable development goals. So the influence of the SDGs on the legislative process and how policies are developed is remarkable in recent times. You would all agree with me that the Sustainable Development Goals is a global agenda calling for action. By 2030, the international community developed 17 goals for us to be able to achieve, which has to make progress in human development, or which has a remarkable impact on the human race. So whether in the fight against corruption or climate change, the SDGs have considerable influence on the legislative process. So many parliaments have taken steps to streamline the SDGs in their oversight activities. Domesticated indicators are now used to hold the executive to account. And this is, as I said earlier on, some of these slides are as a result of my experience in Parliament. For the Parliament of Sierra Leone, we are among the first parliaments in the sub-region that streamlined the SDGs in our activities. With collaborative effort with other ministries, departments, and MDs and agencies, we've been able to domesticate some of the indicators of the SDGs. So the parliamentary committees are now using these domesticated indicators to hold the executive accountable. What do we mean about domesticated indicators? It's textual. The definition of poverty in, say, for example, in Kenya cannot be the same definition for Canada. The definition of poverty in the United States cannot be the same for Cote d'Ivoire. The definition for poverty in Sierra Leone cannot necessarily be the same for Ghana. Or say, for example, cannot be the same for the United Kingdom. So SDGs indicators are supposed to be domesticated. We, on the United Nations high-level political forum, it's being used as a form to assess the progress of implementation through the voluntary national reviews. All the countries of the United Nations who acceded to the Sustainable Development Goals report to the UN high-level political forum on the progress of implementation. The document that's submitted to the HLPN is what's referred to as voluntary national reviews. Their states explain to the United Nations how far they are, what the progress they have done, or the progress they have made on the implementation of the SDGs. Another new normal. The pandemic has had a considerable influence on the way Parliament engages and organizes business. There is no denial on it. The pandemic has created a lot of problems for the human race, especially for Parliament. It has forced Parliament to modernize, expose Parliament to new ways of doing things, put pressure on the legislative process in the period of emergencies, make Parliament technologically more open and transparent. Another new normal element, the new media or the social media. It serves as a reservoir of knowledge, a heaven of information, misinformation, and disinformation. I need not to say anything on this. All of us are engaged with the social media. It is clear that we know the new media is a reservoir of knowledge, also a reservoir of information, misinformation, and disinformation. And that has created a lot of impact on Parliament and the legislative policy making process. Social media is also a pathway to influencing the legislative policy process and the new way of bringing citizens Hello.
Yes, Mr. Rogers, you are back on.
Okay. Whatever you want to say about social media, for Parliament, it is bringing citizens closer to their elected representatives. Conclusion. I wish to conclude on these few notes. Understanding the practices and procedures of Parliament is an everyday learning process. How practices and procedures influence effective legislative policy depend on the system of government, typology of that Parliament, the rules of procedure, or mechanisms available at its disposal. As Parliament evolves, emerging issues also influence its ways of doing things. On that note, I want to thank you all for your audience.
Thank you very, very much, Mr. Dean Rogers, for this brilliant presentation. It has been worth the wait, that we had to endure on the technical front, because within a matter of important minutes, you have been able to basically walk us through some very interesting nuances about how parliaments work. I found your specific emphasis on post-legislative scrutiny and the importance of same as a new area, the issues on SDGs and Parliament, social media and Parliament, and the new era issues of even technology, and Parliament as very important aspects that needed to be added on here. And so, colleagues on the call, at this point, we have heard Mr. Rogers, who has made an awesome presentation to us on different issues. What we are going to do is that, should you have a question, please feel free to put in the chat box. Alternatively, You may also want to enable, use the questions platform to address some of the questions that you may have, and then we will do well to ask them. In the meantime, also, if the translation team can help with some of the colleagues who may have asked some of the questions or made some of the comments in French, it would be of great use to us. Now, let me do well to also announce that we would have the recording of Mr. Dean Rogers' session available online for all of us. Of course, as we have registered, we will be able to receive the recording of the session. Mr. Rogers, we see a lot of participants give you thumbs up for a beautiful presentation done. Monsieur Bernat is asking if he can get a copy of the presentation done by Mr. Rogers. Yes, for those of us who had registered as participants, there will, apart from the video recording, we have a plan where these materials from the presentations are developed into knowledge products, you know, that can be shared with you both in English and in French. So Mr. Rogers' presentation will be packaged into a knowledge product in an English and French version, and we will share on our respective platforms with those of you who have joined us. There is also the Monsieur Bennett again. I don't think this is a question. I think he makes an observation, of course, at some point in time. So we're still waiting for, if you have any questions, we'll do well to address them for you. If you have any questions, please bring them to our attention, and then we'll do well to address them for you. So now, Mr. Rogers, let me ask a particular question that also borders my mind. You know, as civil society organizations, how do you think, in your experience with working with parliaments, can we be of importance with the post-legislative scrutiny effect? Because if post-legislative scrutiny is the means by which Parliament conducts, quote and unquote, a monitoring and evaluation, as you put it, of the laws that they have passed, we know that members of Parliament and the institution of Parliament cannot be everywhere. How do we as civil society, or how will you recommend from your experience that civil society can work with Parliament to monitor and evaluate, quote and unquote, the presentations or the laws that have been passed, and to provide feedback for purposes of post-legislative scrutiny?
Yeah, thank you very much. This question is very important. 3 weeks ago, or thereabouts, we were in Sierra Leone, and we held an engagement with the civil society organizations.
Correct.
Of course, it is clear that civil society is a critical player in the legislative process. Through sharing information with Parliament, and Sierra Leone is a very good example, because the civil society organizations in Sierra Leone are engaging Parliament on those issues, conducting studies, sharing the studies with Parliament, conducting surveys, engaging members of Parliament on the applicability of the law before they pass. So I think one critical way civil society will be very important in the post-legislative scrutiny process is to share information with Parliament. And thankfully, we have civil society organizations on thematic areas. Say, for example, climate change. The civil society organization doing its work on climate change will inform Parliament or engage the Parliamentary Committee on the Environment. So, hello?
Yes, we can hear you, Mr. Rogers.
Engage the Parliamentary Committee on the Environment, share information with the committee, which will inform a policy review, the post-legislative scrutiny as the case may be. So one of the most important entry points, in my opinion, is by way of civil society informing Parliament or sharing information with Parliament.
Hello, are you there? Okay, great. So yes, we got that. And so it means that as civil society organizations, we've got to be proactive with our engagement with Parliament. But would you say, from your experience with Parliament, of course, we know that you as an insider, of course, I am speaking also as a civil society person, parliaments generally, maybe you can speak for the Parliament of Sierra Leone, but you also have peers you may have engaged with. There is always the impression that parliaments generally are not so receptive, to civil society coming up with different forms of information, because parliamentarians sometimes are of the opinion that these are a group of people who, are running different projects and they come inundating us with all manner of positions on particular subject matter with the interest of their funders and donors in mind. What will you say will be some of the mechanisms to ensure that we can build better working relationships with parliaments as civil society organizations to make our technical expertise almost always readily available to Parliament and to make them also willing to take on these information when we provide them?
Yeah, this is a very important question. Because we've had discussions on this for a very long time. What is clear is that CSOs have to realize that Parliament is a legislative and also a political assembly. So if you want to engage Parliament, you have to have that at the back of your mind. But sometimes, in our experience in Sierra Leone, we've had civil society members having similar intention like the elected members of Parliament. In fact, in this current Parliament, we have several members of the civil society who were elected as members of Parliament. So sometimes the interest of that civil society wanting to engage Parliament has to be very clear, and it has to be right from Parliament, from politics. Equally so, I'm very much convinced that civil society, especially those who have big funders, sometimes do not disclose to Parliament their real intention. Many years ago, we had a civil society organization that supported the private member bill on abortion. And that became very topical. That bill was very topical. At the end of the day, there was a background spender or funder who wanted to make sure that that bill becomes a law. So again, civil society groups wanting to engage Parliament has to be very clear about their intent and has to disclose the purpose of engaging Parliament. Otherwise, or because the nature of Parliament is also political, there's always the subsistence between Parliament and some civil society organizations.
Very well. Madam Mariam has put on a comment in the chat box. She said that she did not hear quite well the translation on the second paragraph of your conclusion slide. So, Mr. Dean Rogers, if you could refer to the second paragraph of your conclusion slide to aid Madam Mariam to better appreciate that. And then, of course, I will come to one other question that has been put on the questions platform by Sana Seidu after you have addressed that, because he's joining us from Burkina Faso.
Okay, so let me just recap the second paragraph. How practices and procedures influence effective legislative policy depend on the system of government, the typology of that parliament, and the rules of procedures or mechanisms available at disposal. Basically, what I was trying to say is that Parliament is an embodiment of the political system. So the system of government affects the legislative policy making. Say, for example, in a military rule, you don't expect the legislative process to follow through. In bureaucracy, you don't also expect us to follow through. In a dictatorship, even if there's a semblance of parliaments, that governmental system affects the way the legislative process is carried. Second, the typology of parliament. We have 4 categories of parliaments. We have rubber stamp parliaments, we have emerging parliaments, we have transformative parliaments, and informed parliaments. All of these categories are stages. If you are a rubber stamp parliament, which is very common in emerging democracies, the executive dominates, sets the agenda of the legislative process. So even if you have practice and procedures, those practices and procedures are sometimes not very much effectual. So the category or the type of parliament determines the legislative policy making process.
Very well. Very well. Thank you very much, Mr. Rogers, on that. Sana placed a question in the question space. It's a pretty long one in French, but let me help with what the translation says. He says, how can civil society actually succeed in, just a second. How can civil society actually succeed in making parliaments weak? especially in a context where the parliament is virtually one-sided with a presidential majority and cannot really influence the executive power. He cites that in Burkina Faso, parliamentary inquiries or question time have been conducted. Parliamentary inquiries have been conducted in several sectors, but the executives do not take any sanctions. So how do civil society actually succeed in complementing the areas where parliaments are weak in holding the executive branch to account, especially when the executive branch has a stranglehold on parliament? I think this is basically what he's trying to say.
Well, that relates to my conclusion. You know, when the system of government determines how strong that parliament is, and this is a very tricky question, because the CSOs actually have to scan parliament, engage parliament, scan parliament, and see the areas where challenges are, and see the areas where gaps are. From there, CSOs have to make their approach issue-based. You can't take everything at the same time. Say, for example, if you realize that government is not being accountable, or there is corruption, for example, what you do basically is to engage parliament, say, for example, the Public Accounts Committee, to see how you'll be able to support them to make sure that all these recommendations are implemented. But again, for the presidential system of government, which I'm very much familiar with, the presidency is almost absolutely powerful. So it's a 360-degree scanning to see whether the parliament itself has a reformative thinking, because DSO can do just much more. You can't do everything perfect. So I'm advising that in situations, say for example, like Burkina Faso, CSOs have to stand, do a little bit of parliamentary mapping, and make sure that they are approach-based.
Right.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. And it is instructive that this question is coming from Burkina Faso, because the Parliamentary Network Africa team will be in Burkina Faso for their part of the Parliamentary Engagement and Monitoring Organizations workshop on Friday. And so we are hoping that our colleagues who are in Ouagadougou and in Burkina Faso and have joined us will be able to join in on Friday as well, so we can have in-depth conversation into these discussions. And for those of you who have joined us virtually, remember that also on Friday, at the same time you join this virtual session, you can also catch another presentation on a similar subject of parliamentary committees and how to effectively work with them. But Sana again sent in, you know, the questioner who just finished sent in another comment just to say that, of course, there are not enough spaces for consultations and exchanges between civil society and parliamentarians. It is a challenge that the actors will have to overcome in order to learn how to pool parliamentary control and citizens' control of public affairs. And like I said earlier on, in our conversation with the civil society in Ouagadougou on Friday, we'll attempt to address some of these issues. one of our participants who is joining in with a Techno Common 12 device, I don't have the name, but he's asking a very important question, which says, how can persons with disabilities ensure an effective legislative practices and procedures with Parliament that is unfriendly? Okay, so for the practices and procedures that are unfriendly for persons living with disability, how can these persons living with disability work with Parliament to take away some of these barriers, in your opinion? I guess that's the import of the question from the questioner. I would love to know the name of that questioner using the Techno Canon 12 and the country you are joining in from. But Mr. Dean Rogers, please, if you may want to address this question.
Yeah, Parliament have to be deliberate, or Parliament have to have deliberate action to make it inclusive. I can tell you that certain parliaments I know in the sub-region are putting systems and processes in place to make it inclusive. In fact, for example, Sierra Leone, we are now working on a project with the WFD, that's Westminster Foundation for Democracy, which is inclusive and accountable government. We want to make sure that persons with disabilities have considerable impact on the legislative process. And we have to even start it by making Parliament physically accessible to persons with disabilities. As I speak to you, the Parliament of Sierra Leone is on a massive renovation process where we have to make Parliament user-friendly. So persons with disabilities will have access to move freely in the parliamentary environment. And other parliaments I know of have developed disability policies. You know, so these are critical steps parliaments have to take. We have a lot to do in the sub-region. From the parliamentary standpoint, and that's one of the reason we are happy with Parliamentary Network Africa. We will reach there. Definitely, it's a matter of time. Some parliaments are receptive, some are not very much, but it has to take time for us to be able to reach there. So parliaments, reformative parliaments are taking all of these into consideration, especially issues relating to persons with disability.
Right. And yes, I can reiterate that from my experience also, there are other parliaments who are taking the physical access to Parliament seriously and are initiating other innovative measures to ensure that persons living with disability can have access to physical access to Parliament, because that's an important aspect to inclusion, like Mr. Dean Rogers have said. It's a major thing going on in Sierra Leone. It's a major thing in the Parliament of Ghana, for example. And we're happy to notice that. The one who asked the question is actually B. William Yesia from Liberia, was the one who asked the question on persons living with disability. It is at this stage that, not seeing any additional questions in the chat box, I would want to thank you all very, very much for making the time to join us today. I'm seeing participants from across the sub-region. I can see colleagues from Liberia, colleagues from Burkina Faso, colleagues from Ghana, those who have joined in from Sierra Leone, and many more, Cote d'Ivoire and the likes, Burkina Faso, all joining in. And we're happy that we are able to create such platforms through the Open West Africa project conducted by Parliamentary Network Africa to allow us all to learn and share. If you have already registered, you know that you can have access to the learning session on Friday at the communicated time to join in virtually. But for those of you who are in Burkina Faso, we will definitely be happy to meet you at Hotel Palm Beach on Friday, where we'll be having a conversation about how you as civil society organizations can work together in coalitions and networks to better engage your National Assembly, your National Parliament. My name is Sami Obeng, Executive Director here at Parliamentary Network Africa, and I thank you greatly for joining us. Do have a pleasant afternoon or evening, depending on where you have joined us from, and we look forward to seeing you again on Friday. Au revoir. Mr. Dean Rogers, we are grateful to you also for this presentation. As usual, you have done it excellently, and I look forward to more such engagements where we will tap into your expert knowledge and the expert knowledge of the many, many parliamentary clerks like yourself across the continent who have over the years done amazing stuff. Thank you all very, very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you for this opportunity.
All right. So from all of us here in Abidjan, thank you so very much. Au revoir. See you again on Friday. Bye-bye.
Yeah,